Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the post 113, How to Write a Methods Article. And this particular post comes via request from the legendary Kevin, mate of mine. Good on you, Kevin. 2 for 2, thanks for playing. And Kevin and I have been on a methods article writing journey. And I found writing this quite cleansing for us, I think, Kevin. It's been quite a journey. And a lot's going on in the area of publishing methods. Methods are seen to be pretty boring, pretty predictable, but it doesn't have to be this way. And that's what we're going to talk about in the post this week. One of the reasons I think methods and writing about methods is seen to be so predictable and a bit dull is assumptions flood this zone. And there's a hell of a lot of gatekeeping in our disciplines about what is an appropriate method and what is excluded, what is othered. Now, that's why many of you, when you've perhaps seen me in a confirmation of candidature or in another sort of seminar or event, I generally ask a random question like, why did you not select unobtrusive research methods for this particular discussion? Why did you not select that? And the reason I ask that question, that's a proxy for me. Because what I'm asking when I talk about unobtrusive research methods is I'm asking students, I'm asking colleagues, I'm asking researchers to explain to me why they are configuring originality and innovation and research in terms of developing new data sets. Why is originality only configured in terms of new data sets rather than developing really innovative and original interpretations? If we're interested in the phrase sustainable research, and I'm very much interested in the phrase sustainable research, then part of that has got to be breaking up the notion that all of us need more and more and more data. If there's a characteristic of what's happening on planet Earth at the moment, we've got plenty of data. There are plenty of data sets. What we're lacking is innovative, rigorous and clear ways of interpreting and analysing that data and developing originality and newness through the interpretation. But for Kevin this week, we're talking about how to write a methods paper. It's so important, this, and the challenge is it's getting increasingly difficult. There are not many methods journals anyway, and the methods journals that exist are very, very tightly patrolled and guarded by gatekeepers in particular disciplines. And you see the way in which particular disciplines at the moment are being sort of gate-kept, are being bounded and controlled is through the proxy of methods. So what does good work in sociology look like? Well, that good work, the proxy for it, is the deployment of particular methods and not others. And of course, the other problem is that methods endlessly have fashions, right? So 10 years ago, in my fields, basically every random would go, I'm doing autoethnography. I'm an autoethnographer. Are ya? Really? Okay. And so that was just, it was just everywhere. And now I think that the characteristic of, when you ask somebody what they're doing in the applied social sciences, it's endlessly grounded theory. I'm doing grounded theory. I'm doing grounded theory. Oh yeah, that's great. But of course, surveys and semi-structured interviews, let's just do it together as a family, dominate applied social sciences and allied health. When in doubt, semi-structured interviews and surveys. You almost don't have to say the words. It's just assumed that they are the methods that are going to be deployed. And there's an almost evangelical quality to these selections. But all I'm asking today is we just prop for a moment and we think about our methodological selections. And in many ways, we need to return back to the fundamentals that we rarely teach anymore. So what are we doing here? Are we developing representative data sets or illustrative data sets? Both are of value, but discuss what you're doing here. If you're doing 20 semi-structured interviews, do you really think that that is representative of anything at all? It's illustrative and interesting, but don't suggest or intimate that it's more meaningful than it actually is. So for example, are you using principal component analysis? That's great, hope you are. Why or why not? But if you're not using PCA, then I have another series of questions for you. So okay, did you do a data cleanse? How did you handle those outlier data points? Remembering that when we remove those outlier data points, we're removing the outlier people that are represented by them. So just be aware when you're doing a data cleanse or shaping your data, what and who is being excluded. We've seen, particularly in the new disciplines that have been professionalised in the last 50 years or so, so obviously nursing, midwifery, a range of allied health, social work, but also education as well, that many of these difficult questions about methods are being parked. There are right and wrong ways to conduct research, and the proxy for the determination of the right research or the wrong research is the selection of particular methods in particular disciplines. So the diversity of powerful opportunities for data collection and data management at the moment are being denied, repressed, and particularly repressed through publishing. And we're seeing particularly through finite journals that publish methods, but also the gatekeeping of those articles. Now, there are strategies to manage those gatekeeping problems that we're going to talk about today, but can I say those strategies to manage this gatekeeping are really not found in the research literature. We're nearly at, colleagues, 500 videos that I've done for you in the last 10 years. We're nearly there, 500 videos. And can I say, of all the 500 sessions we've shared, this is the worst reading I've ever done to prepare a post for you, or any of the videos. It is shocking. The literature is dreadful. It is dominated by these random articles or selections of pretty poor textbooks talking about how to describe your methods in as few words as possible, or even better for some of these articles, how to avoid writing methods altogether and simply refer to another article where you talked about the methods. Yuck. So the role of research methods in innovation, in change, in sustainability in research methods that may take a very interesting approach to ethics, so balancing risk and reward in an overt and interesting and careful way. And, for example, research methods that place failure at their centre, undercooked, undermentioned, often invisible in the research methods literature. Now, as I've said really for my entire professional career, 30 years, what we don't talk about is actually more important than what we do talk about. Now, we know the sciences and quant dominate, I understand that, but the lack of innovation in this field is remarkable. So let's talk about this. And I want to start off with a story from one of my students to explain how we've got into this mess and why it is so serious. So one of my PhD students, and I've had hundreds of higher degree students now, but one of my PhD students was in education, and she was using unobtrusive research methods, looking and working with the legendary Terence Johnson and his work on professionalism and power, and using this old theoretical suite for a new context, and particularly an underexplored area of the education workforce. Fantastic topic, great topic. And of course, education policy. So working in education policy, important area, fantastic. So we're revisiting an old theory, the SOC is clearly in place, this is tremendous. So we're going into the confirmation of candidature, should be a no-brainer. This student is being supervised by my late husband Steve Redhead and myself, two of the most experienced supervisors probably on planet Earth, and so in we go, great, no problem. And all of a sudden this very, very senior professor, who was not, can I say, an assessor, so the assessors were cool, they got it, it was fantastic, interdisciplinary, thanks for playing high theory, great. But then this old senior education professor started sort of the, where's your research? Where's your data? Where's your interviews? Where's your surveys? There's no research if you're not doing surveys. Where's your data? That was the voice over and over again. So it just, we thought, calm the farm, it'll calm down. It didn't calm down. Where's the dana? And so I sort of did a Dr. Phil intervention and said, just to be clear, there are many higher degrees that have theoretical innovations and theoretical piece, and it's looking at education policy. Obviously, education policy research is an important field. One doesn't just investigate that through surveys and interviews. Didn't quieten her down, and therefore Steve had been sitting back, and as most of you remember with Steve, pretty quiet guy, pretty calm guy. He watched this for about 35 minutes and then he lost his rag and just cut this woman up completely to talk about the consequences of empiricism on educational research. And then it all got a bit quiet. So that story, I hope, gives you a sense of what's going on here. Pick a discipline, whether we're dealing with the experimental sciences right through to fine arts and theology. We see the homological imperative of methods, the notion that there's only a finite number of methods to select, and these expectations, and of course these expectations are actually assumptions that patrol the parameters of what we call knowledge. Therefore, it is incredibly important that we respect and support our colleagues that are doing the innovative work in diverse methods and methodologies. Great. Now, peer review is so important and so valuable. I'm not the person to critique peer review. I believe in it completely. I've read all sorts of random, pretty dreadful pieces to me, peer review. I'm not that person. If you don't have peer review, if other scholars are not evaluating your work, then it's just a vibe. Then you're just expressing an opinion. And I think we've got enough opinions on the planet at the moment. But what I'd ask is, as we all move through our career, and for our early career researchers who've been with me for 10 years, when you enter peer review, as a peer reviewer, can I ask that you approach any discussion of methods in an open way, in an active way, in a learning way, outward, interested in the development of methods rather than closing down the field. Now, I know that the methodological section of theses, dissertations, and also articles is heavily truncated. And we have, particularly in the applied social sciences, really, really naive assumptions about surveys and semi-structured interviews. It's getting, to be frank, ridiculous. Now, methods in the humanities are primarily qualitative. We talk about textual analysis, semiotics, social semiotics, creative-led methods, creative-based methods, practice-led methods, practice-based methods, arts-based methods, arts-led methods, you get the picture. But behind these phrases like creative-led methods are actually hundreds of diverse strategies behind them. So that can be a really problematic phrase. And as you know, one of the great problems, and I've written books on this, but one of the great problems about artifacts and exegetical research and the methodologies that fuel and feed them is that there's very little space for diversity. So one of the reasons that the failure rate of creative-led theses and the split decisions in creative-led theses are so expansively horrific is because there are assumptions about what are the correct methods when we're dealing with creative-led research. And basically they're very straightforward notions of the how of the writing, so almost like a diary rather than high theory talking about more complicated relationships between form and content. So the first bit of advice that I want to offer you if you're interested in publishing on methodology, and I want you to, is the same advice I offered the legendary Tiffany, hi Tiff, and the legendary Nat, hi Nat, when we were writing our work on creative-led methods. And I realised this was a lot more than an article, it was expanding, and I said, how about we write a short book, right? Now, this is an important innovation, and this is new, this is great, please use this facility. So Springer, Emerald, but also Stanford, and what was the other one I was talking about this week? Bristol University Press. So Stanford and Bristol University Press are doing really interesting work in methods. So think about publishing a short book. If you can get it to 22, 25, 28,000 words, so about 2.5 articles, then go for the short book. You will find an audience and you won't have the craziness that I've talked about so far. So short books, great for innovative methods. Knock yourself out, pick up great citations. Thanks. Okay, so you don't want the short book. You want to go to a peer-reviewed article. So let's get into it. Let's get into the how of how we write methods papers. So what is a method or methods article? Well, it is a subgenre of academic peer-reviewed articles. It is a slice or part of it. The goal is to describe and explore the development and the advancement of research methods. The problems emerge, and this has been a catastrophe, I would argue, in the last 5 years. The problems emerge when a methods article is assumed to follow the standard layout of a conventional research article. So what's happening, sadly, in many journals at the moment is I lose the will to live, is they're providing the authors, so us as researchers, that this article must go through these particular headings. So they're providing a template for us, right? Now the problem is that might work for sort of a data-driven, pretty straightforward, applied social science article. It doesn't work at all for a methods article. So that means you get a desk rejection because you can't use the headings that are organised for a data-heavy article, right? So you see the first problem. Now, actually methods papers are very diverse and can have incredibly diverse structures. They look very different from other articles and they look very different from each other because they're investigating all sorts of different fields and areas. So how decisions were made about research, how data was collected, how data was analysed, validation protocols, robustness, repeatability or not. So for me, a great diversity of structures can and should be used here. But remember, experimental methods are only one mode of methods paper. We've got experimental methods, we've got theoretical methods, we've got observational methods, we've got theoretical, right? So there are so many different types of methods paper. Now, all these modes of doing methods have value. They're great, they're important, they are like a sorbet for our brain. We learn new stuff. So putting into clear terms, what does a method paper do? It basically has two questions. What did you do? And how did you do it? Right? They're the two questions. What did you do? How did you do it? Now, all the best of methods papers take those two questions and then get themselves very busy looking at what went wrong, the iterations of change through the methods, alternative pathways that are available, and reflexivity about the methodological choices that were not made. So a methods paper is amazing in terms of research integrity because it enhances your transparency, your accessibility, and your reproducibility. It's theoretically rigorous. Yeah, because it provides a new way of thinking about how we write research questions and how we think about the questions we are not asking. Now, I've always said, only slightly flippantly, that when we choose our methods, we choose what we will not discover. When we choose our methods, we choose the data sets that will not be available to us. So for me, the other great gift of a methods article is that it works with and acknowledges failure. And for me, it really starts to enable sustainable research. Because when you're showing what went wrong, when you're showing the failures, you're saving other researchers time and you're saving the planet resources. So I would argue sustainable research starts with promoting and supporting methods-based research. Now, there are journals that specialise in methods, but they're very, very few and located in very specific areas, right? So obviously nature research and nature methods is the obvious example here. BMC, medical research methodology, they're fine. So as you can see, medical research and nature, right? So that's sort of where we get some publishing traction in methodology. But protocols.io is also available. So this is an open access sharing protocol that allows people to share their methodology before, during and after data collection. And these protocols can be updated at any time, and there's some very nice version control. So there's some options for you, and I hope that the innovations in publishing will increase to and diversify. Okay. So noting all of this is so incredibly difficult, and I'm not prettying this up for you. Noting that publishing methodology papers is so tough. Why would you do it? Now, there are plenty of reasons. Firstly, traditional research, particularly in the applied social sciences, allows very little space for a proper discussion of methods and methodological choices. And the capacity to take a full article is rare these days, but that stretching, that growth, allows us to particularly talk about repeatability and have full disclosure to our readers, our audiences, and our colleagues. So these methods are then available for the consideration of others. And yes, if you can get a methods paper through, you're going to pick up some good solid citations. Okay. So there are incredibly interesting, innovative components of a methods paper that you can deploy. For example, there can be a focus on the equipment that you use. Love this stuff. There can be a focus on the insider-outsider status that's activated in particular fieldwork contexts. You can look at, I love these papers, looking at the consequences and the impacts of ethics modifications, ethics mods, exploring that. You can do proper and detailed work on co-design in diverse communities. Co-design is becoming one of those words now that's tick a box, right? So, oh yes, it's co-design. How is it co-design? You developed this project and then you went and checked it with disempowered communities. That's co-design, is it? Yeah, nah. So really strong papers on how exactly co-design can be developed. Wow, I would love to be reading more of those papers. But also ethical clearances and the challenges with ethical clearances and particular methods, great. How you ensure privacy for your participants, also innovative use of social media, either in your research or in your research dissemination. But also, I love these papers, how and why you discounted other methods. So you decided on this, that's great. But you decided that these other methods were not useful. Why? Explain it to us. Also, tell us about sampling. Oh yeah, I love discussions of sampling. Too often it's like, oh, snowball. Tell us about it. Tell us about sampling. Let students learn from you. And also, I love these articles. I do, I love them. How we store data sets, right? So, I'm a bit of an old goth. And one of the greatest papers I ever read was about, from Keller here, was about, okay, well, I take pictures of gravestones. Do you, mate? That's great. And how you store that. So how you store that with ethics and decency and repeatability. Love that. Same with oral interviews. Fantastic. How do you store the sonic material and render that resonant? And then you've got the transcription. How do you manage these two versions of the same data? Fantastic. So the challenge, therefore, with all these innovative possibilities available is how we get you through. How can I help you try and get a methods article through? Well, I've got 5 quick suggestions for you to focus your mind. 1, be specific. Methods papers must be specific. They must have clarity. They are how papers, how you did this. So precision, clarity, repeatability. What did you do? Be clear. People who have never read your results, who have never read your research questions, who will never read your research outcomes or outputs, need to understand what you did, how you did it, and why you did it that way. Cool. The second imperative for writing a methods paper is really the crucial one, I would argue. We all need to have a very strong sense of who the audience for that article will be. Now, this is where I think methods papers and journals, but methods papers hit a bit of a Titanic iceberg. Who do you want to read about these methods? Who is your audience? And that will help you configure the language that you choose and the topics that you explore through that paper. And if it helps you, the number one imperative I use when talking about methods is what makes your work unusual? Why would people be interested in it? Now answer that question. Why would people be interested in it? Don't just go, oh, let me tell you about semi-structured interviews. Team, don't bother. Let's talk about how to use a pipette. Team, that's not what we're talking about, right? What makes your methods important for noting is why they are distinct. What did you do that was edgy, that was different, that was brilliant? Tell us about it. 3, contextualize your methods. Now, it is very important that if you're talking about a method or methods, that you explain your bespoke specific context, and that will then allow other scholars to see if it is generalizable to their particular context. You've got to talk about the differences, certainly, but be respectful of the past of research methods. You've got to be intellectually generous here. We want to see lots of citations of the previous ways in which methods were deployed in your discipline, in this field, for this subject. Be intellectually generous. But once you've done that work, the enlivening component of the article is when you talk about your innovation, what you did differently. 4, use diverse media platforms. This is new. I'm talking about this with all my students at the moment. Crucial. And it is increasing and it's important. Use diverse media interfaces to show your innovation. Let me explain what that means. We're in a digital age. So start to take a lot more photographs of the how, of the work you are doing. Take photos in the lab, take photos in the field. I'll give you an example. So for my museum work, when I'm looking at how audiences engage with exhibitions, I look at carpets and I take photographs of carpet where the carpets are worn, shows the direction that people go and look at these different objects and artifacts, and the really popular objects and artifacts, you can see the groove in the carpet. So I take pictures of carpet. My other personal favourite when I'm doing work on GLAMs, galleries, libraries, archives and museums, is I'm very interested in the use of sound in museums. And I'm therefore spent a lot of time looking at what's called sonic bleeding. So I'm standing in one particular installation and I'm holding up my Zoom recorder and I'm showing the inelegant use of sound and how it bleeds between the installations. So they thought a great deal about objects and visuality, but denied the sound. So I record sonically what is occurring in that space. So as you can see, if you think about the world like this, methods involves collecting a lot of textual material. We have this incredible diversity of textual systems that are now available to us to deploy. Now remember, all of this must be in ethical parameters. I'm not saying you're doing a semi-structured interview and you take a picture of that person. That's not what I'm saying. You haven't got the right to do that. But what I am saying is, for example, your preparation process can be recorded. The technology that you've used, screen grabs of the software that you are deploying. Now, all of this is absolutely fabulous. So enliven your methods discussion through enlivening your textual systems. And 5, don't be afraid to go goth. Now, you know, I've just written a book on failure, and thank you everybody for the great support of it. No one's more stunned than me. But I've just written a book on failure. And of course, failure in methods is a very big part of this book. If we bury failures and only publish successes, then I'm arguing that in many ways, that's a form of research misconduct through omission. Even with your successful methods, there is so much value in talking about what went wrong. So let me give you some examples. Being very focused on the limitations of your methods. What will you not discover because of the choice of methods that you've made? What problems emerge through the application of your method, and how did you correct those challenges? How did you adjust research design to enable what you discovered through the application of your methods? What are the disadvantages of semi-structured interviews, surveys, or unobtrusive research methods? Is your method reliant on a particular university context, materials, or personnel? Are your methods reliant on specific equipment? And is good funding and sustainable research funding required to activate those methods? Noting what's happening in international higher education at the moment, being aware of the impact on your methods and on your research of a lack of funding is crucial. You can also talk about yourself. But this isn't just let me overshare me. No, this is about thinking actively about positionality and how your positionality impacted on the data that you did collect and what you did not collect. And also, I love this one, what professional development did you need to activate these methods? How rarely do we have this conversation? And this is also part of the trick, team. If you can't get a methods paper through, just tilt the research a little bit and aim to get published in an equipment journal or a research education journal or a SOS, a scholarship of supervision journal, or a research dissemination journal. Look, team, it is amazing in academic life when we just dismiss particular areas as dull or boring or predictable. And actually the light and the energy and the innovation exist there. Methods at the moment are squashed like sausage meat into its skin. So what I'm suggesting today is this is the time, this is the moment to slit that skin and allow methods to stretch, to transform, to spread and diversify. Innovation and excellence are not only found through outstanding results, but powerful, reflexive and responsive methods. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.